Newsworld is proudly brought to you by Canon.
Morning, welcome to Newsworld. State Opposition Leader Jeff Kennett will face a challenge to his leadership next week. The crisis has been prompted by Mr Kennett's comments about blocking supply and forcing an early election.
Mr Kennett's outbursts last week stunned even his Liberal Party colleagues. First, he withdrew his pledge not to block supply and followed that with speculation about an early election. Those comments have prompted the Liberal leader in the upper house, Alan Hunt, to withdraw his support for Mr Kennett. Mr Hunt has called for a spill of leadership positions at next Tuesday's party meeting. Without Mr Hunt's support, Mr Kennett will have great difficulty hanging on to the leadership. Mr Kennett is presently on holiday in Queensland, but last week he admitted his comments had not been received warmly.
A lot of people are always scared of change. When you bring about a new order of things, those who have done well under the old system are concerned, and some who may do well under the new system are lukewarm.
Mr Kennett survived a leadership challenge last December, and one of the contenders then, Ian Smith, is likely to feature prominently again. But one name which has been touted heavily in recent times is frontbencher Phil Goode. Although Mr Goode has denied any direct challenge to Mr Kennett, in the event of a spill, he is certain to be a candidate.
And tonight Mr Kennett has described the leadership challenge as the greatest act of disloyalty he'd experienced during 10 years with the Liberal Party. Speaking from his holiday on Orpheus Island, he said Mr Hunt had used younger members of Parliament to achieve his own objectives. Mr Kennett said he'll return to Melbourne on Sunday to assess the situation. Well, after all that, there was some good news for the Liberals yesterday when secret surveys show that swinging voters have lost confidence in the Hawke government. The surveys, commissioned by the Liberal Party's federal arm, indicate that some voters are fed up with the government's handling of the economy.
The Liberal survey, undertaken in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, confirms what ALP researchers already know. Middle Australia is becoming increasingly disenchanted with the Hawke government in general and its tax policies in particular.
They feel it's lost direction and lost its way.
And the majority of uncommitted voters surveyed by the Liberals blame the Prime Minister for this lack of leadership, claiming, among other things, that Mr Hawke is obsessed by popularity. And for the first time, Treasurer Paul Keating gets harsh treatment from swinging voters.
That they were very stung by what they saw as his double standards in relation to his living away from home allowance.
And the Treasurer's response?
Don't worry about it.
But Hawke Labor is worried about it. So worried, in fact, it's prepared to fine-tune its controversial fringe benefits tax and trade unions permitting abandon its policy of wage indexation.
Brisbane has missed out on hosting the 1992 Olympic Games. That honour will now go to Spanish city Barcelona. The decision by the International Olympic Committee in Switzerland tonight was a blow to Brisbane, which has spent more than a year lobbying for the Games.
Brisbane was billed as one of the 6 front-runners to host the 1992 Olympic Games after its success in staging the 1982 Commonwealth Games. But Brisbane knew from the beginning it had stiff competition from Barcelona, home of International Olympic Committee President and odds-on favourite to take the Games. Brisbane offered ready-built facilities and no terrorism, a factor which did not seem to deter the committee after Barcelona was hit by a terrorist car bomb only yesterday. Strong competition and lobbying for the Games appeared when Los Angeles in 1984 proved it could be a profitable experience for the city that stages the elite sporting event. But tonight in Brisbane, the City Council is counting the cost of this $5 million bid to put Brisbane on the international map.
Meanwhile, Olympic gold medalist Dean Lucan is refusing to comment about drug charges laid against him by the South Australian Police. He was arrested in Port Lincoln on Thursday after a scuffle with police. Despite the controversy, Lucan flew to the Gold Coast yesterday to open a new restaurant.
This morning, Dean Lucan was en route to the Gold Coast after missing his flight from Port Lincoln to Adelaide last night and having to drive 600 kilometres. On arrival at Coolangatta Airport, the Olympic hero and his manager were met by a vehicle waiting on the tarmac.
Dean, how have you reacted to yesterday's incident? Are the charges likely to affect your career at all? You upset by what's happened?
Then again outside a Gold Coast restaurant, the big man had little to say.
Good afternoon, gents. I'm here to open Denny's restaurant today, and thank you for coming.
Even though he was avoiding the media, Lucan wasn't about to go into total hiding. In fact, in opening this new restaurant, he attracted more publicity than expected. Yesterday, Dean Lucan was confronted by plainclothed police at his hometown airport. Acting on a tip-off, they attempted to search him, but witnesses say he wouldn't cooperate. The millionaire tuna fisherman was questioned and later charged with possessing what's thought to be a small amount of cannabis and for resisting arrest.
Sydney police are investigating the mysterious theft of several important documents belonging to Dr. Jeffrey Edelsten. The personal files were the only items stolen during a burglary in Sydney's northwest.
Police believe thieves broke into the building through the fire exit in the early hours of Tuesday morning. Cash was taken from an office of the National Australia Bank. The super clinic office was turned upside down. Filing cabinets and desks were opened, a legal document taken, and also the entire personal file of Dr. Jeffrey Edelsten. Meantime, Edelsten was formally charged today with conspiracy to pervert the course of justice and conspiracy to assault. The charges allege that Edelsten offered to pay hitman Chris Flannery to assault one of his former patients.
We're going to work very hard, and hopefully it won't be long and it'll all be behind us.
Today, Edelsten's legal staff returned the summonses to Castlereagh Street Court. Edelsten was granted permission to remain at home, and the case was adjourned until December. Before then, the Supreme Court will decide whether tapes allegedly recorded from Edelsten's car phone can be used as evidence in the conspiracy case.
An appeal set up to help shotgun victim Kay Nesbitt has topped the $200,000 mark amid calls for a permanent fund for crime victims. The money will help Kay rebuild her life after she suffered horrific injuries at her Malvern home last year.
13 months after being shot in the face when she answered a knock at her door, Kay Nesbitt is slowly putting her life back together. With her dog Cara always at her side and the support of many friends, 30-year-old Kay is optimistic about the future and plans to buy a house in Melbourne. An appeal set up by the Victims of Crime Assistance League has raised more than $205,000, much of which will go towards medical bills. Kay has just undergone further surgery to reconstruct part of her face, and another operation is scheduled early next year. Kay says she was staggered by the generosity of the donations, but says there are countless other victims of crime who can only hope for a maximum of around $17,000 compensation. She believes a permanent fund should be set up to help these people.
Everyone in Australia should get behind vocal, because I mean it's them that, you know, that it's going to affect. I mean, not everyone's untouchable. You don't know who's going to, you know, when you're going to be the next one.
In news still to come, Israeli troops move into Lebanon in search of a pilot shot down by militiamen. And time is running out for a group of aviators who want to fly around the world non-stop. Israeli troops have crossed the border into Lebanon in search of an airman who was reportedly being held by Shiite militiamen. The airman was one of two shot down during an Israeli raid on suspected PLO camps.
All night long, Israeli trucks and elite troops crossed into Lebanon to back up a helicopter search for a missing pilot. Israeli military sources believe he may be dead, but this morning a spokesman for the Lebanese Shiite movement, Amal, claimed they'd captured him alive with a broken arm. The pilot bailed out of his fighter bomber yesterday after his jet was destroyed by Palestinian guerrillas during an Israeli air raid on PLO bases. The co-pilot landed unhurt in the hills and was rescued by Israeli helicopters in a dramatic flight to freedom. The co-pilot dangled from the helicopter that rescued him all the way back to Israel. The helicopter search was backed up also by Navy gunboats, which reportedly fired through the night on Palestinian positions. An Israeli spokesman said the army wouldn't rest until it had found the pilot.
The Soviet Union has had a change of heart and allowed leading dissident David Goldfarb to emigrate to the United States. The ailing Goldfarb has been trying to get to the States for the last 8 years for medical treatment.
It was apparently a multi-pronged effort that won the release of Soviet dissident David Goldfarb from the Soviet Union. The 67-year-old scientist, suffering from diabetes, blindness, and heart trouble, was brought to the U.S. Thursday by American industrialist Armand Hammer on his private plane. Goldfarb's son, Alexander, a Columbia University professor, had written an open letter to Hammer pleading for his help. He interpreted his father's words.
Since Dr. Hammer told me that tomorrow he is taking me to the United States, I was so excited that I didn't sleep all night.
Also on hand to greet David Goldfarb was Nicholas Daniloff. Goldfarb reportedly refused to help the KGB frame Daniloff in 1984. Armand Hammer says he expects more Jews will be allowed to leave the Soviet Union as conditions improve between the superpowers.
Well, time is running out for an intrepid band of American aviators who plan to fly an experimental aircraft around the world without refueling. A broken propeller has delayed the flight by the aircraft they call the Voyager.
It's a sign that greets motorists as they drive into the small town of Mojave. It's a community clearly proud of the Voyager, and sometime soon they expect further reason to be proud. Just when that will be, however, no one is quite sure. For 5 weeks, the huge experimental plane has remained in a hangar after the propeller broke on a test flight which was to have been the last before the round-the-world record attempt. Just 3 months ago, there were scenes of jubilation after Voyager touched down, breaking the world record for non-stop flight. For 111 hours, the huge praying mantis-like aircraft flew over a distance of 11,500 nautical miles. For the two record-breaking aviators, it's a race against time. To attempt the 26,000 nautical mile flight around the world, they have to take off by the end of November, before weather patterns make the flight too risky. They say they'll have the engines and new propellers fitted by the end of the month. A series of test flights will follow, and then, they hope, the big one, around the world, non-stop, in 12 days.
The Queen, on her whirlwind tour of China, has visited the country's most important archaeological find in the past 100 years. She's been shown through the vault of the terracotta soldiers that had lain hidden in an emperor's tomb for 22 centuries.
Even distinguished guests are not usually allowed to walk among the silent soldiers. That's reserved for emperors, presidents and queens. The Queen and her party descended into the cavern for a closer inspection. The 8,000 soldiers, in their armor and short-belted gowns, have come to symbolize the history of China, but also the strength and vigor of the socialist state. Every one of these figures was discovered in fragments and lovingly recreated by the restorers. Each face is different and possibly based on the faces of the men who guarded the emperor in life. Incidentally, the emperor's plan didn't work. When his dynasty was overthrown shortly after his death, his enemies systematically destroyed his city and the soldiers whose job it was to guard him in the afterlife.
Well, to business news now, and in Canberra yesterday there were top-level talks between government and business leaders on the fringe benefits tax. As Paul Lynham reports, those talks have encouraged businessmen to forecast major changes to the controversial tax.
I'm still optimistic that the government will make a shift in its position, a shift on enough of these issues to make a significant difference.
Optimistic indeed, especially in view of the 4 key changes to the fringe benefits tax that the business leaders put to the Prime Minister and Treasurer Keating. That employees and not employers should pay the tax, that benefits should not be taxed where they're a necessary part of the job, that the tax overall should be greatly simplified, and that the government should aim at the main benefits and not try to catch every little perk. Indeed, the businessmen claim that by focusing on the key items, like company cars, entertainment and subsidised housing and allowances, the government would still get about 95% of its expected revenue.
But for the sake of the other 5%, the present Act creates an administrative nightmare with horrendous costs to the private sector.
The Prime Minister has recently raised the prospect of changes of substance as well as administration of the tax. But spokesmen say it's too early to comment on the business leaders' optimism.
To the stocks now, and a good end to the week on the exchange yesterday, with industrials and resources sectors doing well. Industrials were up 17.8, while in the resources sector, gold climbed to 1,639.1 points. The All Ordinaries was up 13.9, while metals and oil and gas also followed the upward trend. North Broken Hill was the day's top trader, up 10 to $2.80. Western Mining was also up 10, along with CRA, which closed at $8.24. News Corporation was up $1.60 to close at $34.50. ANZ was up just 2 cents. The Australian dollar closed trading at 63.67 US cents, while the Reserve Bank's trade-weighted index was 52.9 points. Well, sport is next, and after the break, Peter Donegan will have a preview of the Caulfield Cup and a look at Dennis Connor's victory over the Kiwis in the America's Cup Challenge Series.
Good morning, everyone. A meeting of challenging America's Cup syndicates in Fremantle last night voted against changing a rule which threatened the immediate future of the giant-killing Kiwi yacht in New Zealand. A two-thirds majority was not reached, meaning that New Zealand will not have to undergo a coring test on her controversial glass-reinforced plastic hull. Meanwhile, out on the water yesterday, the Kiwis had more worries as they went down to Dennis Conner aboard Stars and Stripes in their long-awaited clash. Other winners were America 2, White Crusader and French Kiss, while Italia and USA were victorious when their respective opponents failed to even reach the starting line. Today's big event was to be the first of two momentous struggles between the Kiwis and the Americans, and New Zealand's Chris Dixon got the upper hand at the start on starboard tack. When they came back together on opposite tack, as expected, the Kiwis were in front, but from then on, Dennis Conner called the shots. The blue hull boat looked great in the swell of up to 2 metres, and the 24-knot wind proved little problem. Try as he may, Chris Dixon could not reduce Conner's lead, and at the first mark the margin was 1 minute 7 seconds. The downwind run saw the situation alter little, and at the bottom mark Stars and Stripes led by 1 minute 17. Everything went to plan for Conner on the next 3 legs, and he led by 1:05 at the 5th mark. But the crew on KZ7 refused to give in and reached the 6th mark just 18 seconds behind. But the Americans proved much quicker downwind, leading by 31 seconds at the last mark, and with Conner covering Dixon all the way down the final leg, the margin at the finish was 49 seconds in favour of Stars and Stripes. But whatever the result today, the battle between the pair has only just begun. And the points table now sees 3 equal leaders, namely America 2, Stars and Stripes and New Zealand, with White Crusader 2 points behind. Closest of the remainder are Canada 2 and French Kiss, while the Old Lady Courageous is still yet to score. Sonny Gavaskar's 33rd Test century has helped India to within 54 runs of Australia's first innings tally at stumps on the 3rd day of the 3rd cricket test in Bombay. Gavaskar put together yet another superb innings before falling to Greg Matthews on 103. Matthews was by far the most productive of the visiting bowlers, finishing with 4 wickets. At stumps, India had moved to 5 for 291. Well, it's only a matter of hours now before 18 of Australia's finest thoroughbreds will line up to contest one of the turf's most coveted races, the $500,000 Foster's Caulfield Cup. One man hoping to have a change of luck in the big race is champion jockey Darren Gauci, who's aiming to break a long run of outs aboard top-staying mare Just Now.
Gauci hasn't ridden Just Now since the pair combined to win the AJC Oaks at Randwick in April. However, that run when Just Now came from last on the turn to win by 5 lengths left Gauci with a lasting impression.
She's a very relaxed mare, and I think that allows her to sprint so quick at the end of her races. I've never been on the horse, you know. As I said before, sprinted so quick at the end of a long race was what she did in Sydney anyway.
Gauci admitted that Just Now was probably more suited to Flemington, where she won the Turnbull Stakes at her most recent start, defeating the subsequent Herbert Power handicap winner Farristan. However, he has no intention of adopting different riding tactics for tomorrow's race.
No point in changing the pattern that she races. She's been racing very well, and if she sprints as fast as what she did when I rode her in Sydney, well, you know, I think she'll win the race.
The track for tomorrow's race is currently rated good, and today it looked a picture. Course manager Terry Watson said heavy rain would need to fall overnight to have any effect on the racing surface.
The track could take, you know, a fair amount of rain before it would really drastically affect it. So I said the track is very hard, and anyway, with the forecast, the way they've been lately, we're hoping that the change doesn't come until at least Sunday.
And of course you'll see today's Cup meeting here on 7, and my selections for the Cup: Canny Lass, the great mare to beat Farristan and Periscope, and as far as the late mail is concerned, both good each way value. Race 2, number 3, Rebecca Gay, and race 7, number 8, Celso. Well, hopefully you may have got a bank together for the Cup with last night's Echuca harness racing and the Geelong Greyhounds. Daily double at Echuca on 1 and 4, 31.65. Extra double 8 and 1, 3.15, and the quaddie on 8 double 1 4, $129.20, and the Geelong Greyhounds quaddie on 3 2 5 and 1, a mammoth $4,632.45. The Australian hockey team will be anxious to make up for the disappointment of the Los Angeles Olympics when it enters the semi-final of the World Hockey Championships in London later today. Kim Bidstrup reports that although our boys are considered virtual certainties, they're not going to be counting their chickens until the final whistle.
The 16-man Australian squad looked fit and fast during their hour-long workout. Their aggressive, open style of game, with its heavy emphasis on skill,
has taken them into the semi-final against the surprise packet of this tournament, Russia.
The bookies say we'll beat the Russians and go on to take the title. But our own coach echoes the words of the American sportsman who said, it ain't over till it's over.
Sport has a habit of levelling teams out and levelling people out and to bringing people back to earth. And that's what happened to us in LA. Now, we're not about to let that happen here.
If the Australians win, they'll line up for the final against either the powerful West Germans or the very fast English side, who of course are playing on their own turf with the benefit of a home crowd.
And that's all in sport for this morning. The weather is next, and we punters at the Caulfield Cup could be in for a wet day as showers are expected with the cool change.
Now the weather, and the synoptic chart shows a cold front moving steadily across the bight. As it crosses Victoria later today, it'll bring showers mainly in southern and mountain areas. The seas will be very rough. A gale warning is current for coastal waters west of the Prom, including Port Phillip and Western Port Bays. There's a strong wind warning for waters east of the Prom, and there's a minor flood warning for the lower reaches of the Kiewa. On the bays, the winds will shift westerly with the change and reach 20 to 30 knots by the afternoon. Melbourne can expect a warm but cloudy day at first, with showers developing with the change. The temperature will range from a low of 14 degrees overnight to a high of 23, and currently the temperature is 16 degrees. And the outlook for Sunday and Monday is for more showers, with the weather improving by Tuesday. And finally, a look at last night's Tats 2 results, and for a prize of $883, the numbers you'll need are 87 and 5. Well, that ends this edition of Newsworld. News overnight via satellite from the United States starts soon, and I'll be back with the next edition of 7 National News at 6 o'clock tonight. But for now, this is Mark Gillies on behalf of the 7 News team. Good morning.
Newsworld was proudly brought to you by Canon.